Welcome back to College Football Addiction. Now, recently, Kirk Herbstreit went on an episode of the Andy and Ari show on On3, which is a really entertaining and pretty good informational show that they put out. And in that, I think Kirk stepped in it again. This was a couple weeks before our national championship, which we'll talk about in a moment in our video presented by BetUS. Now, in the clip that I'm about to show you, Kirk took some quick shots at Clemson and others in the Southeast. He made some justifications for why ESPN really didn't want SEC folks in the championship, the justification for wanting other teams in there besides the SEC. He whined about some other things like not using his Twitter. You should really go back and check out the full interview. It is hilarious to watch from that perspective. But he stepped in it again because everything he said ended up being incorrect. Check out the clip.
Let me straighten the record on one last thing. The ESPN loves the SEC so much that we could not have paid for a better Final Four with Notre Dame and Ohio State and Penn State and Texas. The only one missing is Michigan. If you could somehow wedge Michigan in, so like this idea that we want Alabama and Texas A&M and Auburn, and are you kidding me? Like if you're asking us who we would want, we'll take Ohio State every year, Notre Dame. Like this is a ratings bonanza. So if you're going to accuse us of anything, you should accuse us of wanting Ohio State, wanting Notre Dame, and these big brands. If you knew anything about ratings, that's who you want. You don't want these small little Clemsons and small little Southern schools when it comes to cheering for ratings. Ratings are big, massive Big Ten brands. That's what ratings are.
And Notre Dame, who either people love or hate. Yeah.
If you get Ohio State, Notre Dame in the national championship, you think we're going to be like, doggone it, if we could only gotten a couple good brands in the championship. Just didn't work out this year.
He talked about what if we got Ohio State and Notre Dame in the national championship, which we, in fact, did. This was right before the semifinal games. He talked about a ratings bonanza. We'll talk about that in a moment, too. The shot at Clemson was interesting. And again, one more thing that I'll talk about in just a moment. But my friend, guess what? Ratings this year were down with those two massive brands that you talked about. You kind of failed. 22.1 million, which is no small number. But then since the start of the college football playoff, there have only been two national championships with lower ratings. We'll talk about why that is in just a moment. We'll talk about Clemson in just a moment. But first, I will give some love to BetUS. If you're betting on the Super Bowl or anything else, college basketball, any tennis at 2 a.m., make sure you're using our code YouTube150, 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your next two. All that up to $2,000. We appreciate BetUS for their support. The code, again, is YouTube150. Now, why were ratings lower? Well, I think there's a pretty easy explanation. But again, this was the lowest college football playoff national championship ratings that we have ever seen outside of just two seasons. One of those was the COVID year, when everybody was scared for their lives about trying to live. Right? And then second was the TCU UGA game, which was over in the first quarter and certainly tanked ratings. But do you ever hear somebody go on and on and on about something, trying to defend it, trying to give it their best go as to why, just don't look over here. This is not the case. And in it, you can tell that they're full of crap. Why do you think that is? Well, because they don't care about ratings. They know that ultimately they're going to get between 20 and 25 million views, and that's all that matters. Their ad sales are going to be fine. It's not like it's going to drop off to 14 million. Even if you had Arizona State versus Boise State, it'll still be good ratings because college football fans care. But they don't care about ratings as much as they do protecting their biggest investment. Their investment is not in Ohio State. Their investment is not in Notre Dame. It's in the SEC. We don't accuse them of just trying to get the best ratings. We accuse them of showing favoritism to their investment, which, let's be very fair, any of us would do too. But Kirk's kind of premise or his thought here of, oh, well, it's not about rating. We love ratings. Look at Notre Dame and Ohio State if that ends up happening, which of course it did. That's what we really want. Why were ratings down this year? The season was too long. The season was way too long. And I know there's this idea of we just want more football and give us more football and we'll be happy. But there comes a point where other teams' fans start to check out. When you have already moved on to the portal and you've already moved on to coaching hires and you're so far removed from your last game, especially your last meaningful game. Like Alabama played in a bowl game, but were their fans really that invested in what happened in Tampa? Florida's fans played in a bowl game. Were they really that invested in what happened in, the game down here in Florida? I don't think so. You're wondering what happens in the portal. You're wondering what happens with hires. The season is so stretched out now. You're competing with the NFL. People's minds have moved on to NFL playoff football in January. And the championship used to happen early enough to where there wasn't as much of a conflict. Now there's a huge one. The NFL's going later, and so the playoffs get pushed a little bit later with 17 games. And our playoffs, college football's playoffs, are going later. And people's headspace is just not the same. Pate had a really good point about the marketing through ESPN versus the NFL model. I won't steal his thunder there, but you should go check out his thoughts on why the ratings were down. But guess whose fault it was that the season is too long now? I won't blame Kirk specifically, but it's ESPN's fault. ESPN is the one who we needed a playoff. We needed to expand the playoff. We needed to make this thing even longer and longer and longer and longer. And guess what they've done? Much like Drake says from Locked On Big 12, they killed the NBA. They killed the MLB. They're working on the NHL now, and college football is their next target. They are killing that because they don't know how to run it. The hype around the national championship this year with two massive brands like Kirk, Kirk is right. Those are massive, massive brands. The hype around the championship was meh. ESPN pissed on the sport for more money, and they're doing their best to ruin it as well. Some fixes. You've got to back the championship up. You've got to have it happening earlier in the month. Next year, I believe it happens on around the 20th as well, or around that date. I think it's a day later because the way the calendar moves. So that will be a disaster. It will also be on a holiday weekend. I think it's on MLK Day as well. Maybe you move up the Army, you move it up so that you start playoffs the weekend of the Army-Navy game. I know people don't necessarily love that, but it's one option. Less time between the playoff games. I don't need 11 days between games. Make it every weekend. Make it every Friday night if you're scared of the NFL's schedule. But less time between playoff games would probably help. Maybe you get rid of conference championship weekend. I know that's not going to happen. I know the SEC and the Big Ten make way too much money on that, but just an idea. Start a week earlier? Well, I hate that idea. I love the idea of starting Labor Day weekend. I love the idea of that kickoff. And so hopefully that's not what happens. But there are some options. You've got to compress it some, though. It's way too much. It blows my mind that we had a national championship of Notre Dame versus Ohio State, and ratings were beneath that of Michigan versus Washington. Back to Kirk for just a moment. SEC brands in the 2022 Natty, following the 21 season, drew in 22.6 million viewers, more than this year's. Remember that shot at Clemson? The 26 Natty and the 2016 Natty, and the 2018 Natty both had more viewers than the last 5 national championships. That includes the SEC only ones. That includes the Bama ones. That includes the Georgia wins. Maybe don't take a shot at Clemson. Maybe Clemson isn't your biggest problem right now. It was funny to me, Clemson's 2016 and 2018 Natties were some of the highest rated national championships that we've ever seen. Not the highest, but I believe those two were 2 of the top 4. The first one being the 2014, right? Like the first year of the national championship. You got to fix the playoff. There are different suggestions on how to do that, seeding, auto bids, etc. But the first thing they could do is maybe compress it, move it back, have a decent finish date. I don't know how they do it. Maybe they don't care, but it would be nice to see that get somewhat fixed. Now, as for Kirk, everything he ends up saying ends up being stupid these days. He has every fan base and most of college football social media after him at all times, to where he's got to lie about his son running the account. Calling out Clemson is hilarious in and of itself when you look at the ratings that Clemson put up. But the idea that this game would just blow ratings away was hilarious because his company, the one that he shills for, is the one that's actively breaking our sport. Now, I enjoyed every single national championship from the time I can remember watching them until this year's. I've watched all of them. So I was at least a 1 in every ratings system that's ever come out. But the idea that the SEC somehow would have hurt the national championship ratings is hilarious. It was wrong when Kirk said it, and it's wrong now. I am never going to be a guy who shills for the SEC or who acts like, oh my gosh, we all just must bow down to the SEC. That's not the game that I play. But Kirk trying to defend against it, Kirk trying to make it about ratings is hilarious to me. And again, the guy who continues to put his foot in his mouth does it again in retrospect on the Andy Ari Show. You can watch that on YouTube. It's a good interview that is hilarious if you watch it through the lens of knowing what we know now. What are your thoughts? What do you think about the ratings? What do you think about the length of the sport? I thought, again, people either love or hate Josh Pate. I thought Josh Pate's video on the ratings was great. He talked about scarcity. He talked about adding weeks. He talked about just different things that they've done. And I thought he had some good points. So go check that out as well. Listen, I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Appreciate BetUS for their support. We'll talk to you guys soon here on College Football Addiction.